What happens when the family you trusted the most becomes the one that hurts you the deepest? For years, fans believed the Braxton sisters' biggest battles were on camera. Heated arguments, emotional breakdowns, and dramatic reconciliations played out for ratings. But this time, the drama didn't start with words. It started with money. Quietly, carefully, and allegedly right under everyone's nose. Sources say what was supposed to be a joyful family comeback quickly turned into a nightmare when a shocking financial discovery shook the Braxton legacy to its core. One sister was left feeling betrayed, another was accused of crossing an unforgivable line, and the most powerful name in the family was forced to make a decision that would change everything. This wasn't about jealousy or petty rivalry anymore. It was about trust, boundaries, and whether blood really is thicker than business. Behind closed doors, emotions reportedly exploded, receipts surfaced, and long-buried resentments finally came to light. Fans thought they knew this family, but what allegedly happened next revealed a side of the Braxtons no one was prepared for. A sister was removed, alliances shifted, and the word family suddenly carried a very different meaning. So the real question is this: when loyalty and money collide, who do you protect, your name, your legacy, or your own blood? The Braxton family has always lived in a complicated space where love, loyalty, fame, and finances collide. Long before cameras followed their lives and fans dissected every argument, the sisters were navigating survival in an industry that rarely protects Black women, especially when family is also business. At the center of it all was Toni, the breakout star whose success carried not only her own dreams, but the weight of an entire family. From the outside, it looked glamorous. On the inside, it was exhausting. For years, Toni had been clear about one thing: if they were going to do anything together publicly, it had to be structured, transparent, and fair. She'd already learned the hard way how fast money could disappear when too many hands reached into the same pot. That lesson came from painful personal experience, including her own financial struggles and bankruptcies that forced her to rebuild from the ground up. So when talks of a Braxton family reboot began circulating, Toni wasn't immediately excited. She was cautious. According to insiders, she agreed only after long discussions about boundaries, contracts, and shared responsibilities. The reboot was pitched as a fresh start: healing, honesty, and a chance to redefine the Braxton legacy on their own terms. Tamar, in particular, saw it as more than just another show. After years of feeling misunderstood, dismissed, and emotionally drained, she reportedly viewed this project as a turning point. Not just for television, but for her personal and financial independence. She began investing her own money into side ventures connected to the reboot, including branding ideas and digital content meant to expand her voice beyond the family dynamic. Behind the scenes, however, the family was already under strain. Old resentments had never fully disappeared. Tamar had been vocal about feeling unsupported, especially when it came to caring for their mother. In past interviews and private conversations that later leaked, Tamar expressed frustration that she and Toni were often the only ones stepping up financially when their mother needed help. Bills, insurance, daily expenses, things that didn't make headlines but added constant pressure. Tamar reportedly felt that responsibility deeply, especially as a divorced mother herself trying to stay afloat in an unpredictable industry. Money had always been a sensitive subject among the sisters, but this time it felt heavier. Unlike past disagreements, this wasn't about borrowing a few dollars or splitting appearance fees. This involved structured accounts tied to production, shared trusts, and business entities meant to protect everyone involved. According to sources close to the production, these accounts were supposed to be tightly monitored, with clear limits on who could access what. That system was designed specifically to avoid the kind of chaos the family had experienced before. Things began to unravel quietly. There was no screaming match at first. No explosive argument caught on camera. Instead, it started with confusion. Tamar allegedly noticed payments not going through for vendors connected to her side projects. At first, she assumed it was a delay or a simple accounting error. Production schedules are messy, especially in early stages. But as days passed, the problem didn't resolve itself. Calls were made, emails were sent, and the answers she received didn't make sense. What reportedly pushed the situation into panic was a notice from the network's finance department flagging irregular activity. A sum of money that should have been untouched had been moved. Not in one obvious transaction, but gradually in smaller amounts that didn't immediately raise alarms. To Tamar, it felt like the ground dropped out from under her. That money wasn't extra. It was already allocated. Losing it meant stalled projects, broken commitments, and another chapter of instability she thought she'd finally escaped. Toni was brought in once the issue could no longer be brushed aside. Known within the family for keeping her composure, even when she's furious, Toni reportedly requested a full breakdown of the accounts. Line by line, transaction by transaction. What she saw, according to insiders, changed her entire posture toward the reboot. The paper trail didn't point to a faceless error or an outside breach. It pointed inward, toward someone the family trusted. For Toni, this wasn't just about protecting Tamar. It was about protecting the integrity of the entire project and, by extension, her own name. She had spent decades rebuilding credibility after public financial fallout. Attaching herself to another situation involving missing money was not an option. Sources say she felt blindsided, not only by the alleged actions themselves, but by the realization that this could happen so close to home, within a family that had already been torn apart by similar issues before. Tamar, meanwhile, was spiraling emotionally. Friends say she went from disbelief to heartbreak in a matter of hours. The betrayal hit deeper because it came at a moment when she was already stretched thin. She had trusted that this reboot would finally be different, that the same patterns wouldn't repeat themselves. Instead, she was facing the possibility that history wasn't just repeating, it was escalating. When the truth began to settle in, the emotional weight spilled into every corner of the family dynamic. Conversations turned tense. Silence became louder than arguments. According to those present, Tamar struggled to even look at certain family members, torn between anger and the hope that there was still some explanation that didn't involve intentional harm. Toni, on the other hand, reportedly moved into decision-making mode. She wasn't interested in excuses. She wanted accountability. Production felt the shift immediately. Filming schedules were paused. Meetings became closed-door and urgent. What was meant to be a celebratory reunion now felt like a crisis management operation. Producers were caught between protecting a highly anticipated show and navigating a family implosion that couldn't be easily edited away. Everyone involved understood that whatever happened next would set the tone for the entire future of the project. This was no longer just a family matter. It was a business issue with legal implications, public perception risks, and long-term consequences. For Toni, the choice ahead was brutal but clear. Allowing unresolved financial betrayal to sit quietly under the surface would poison everything they were trying to rebuild. For Tamar, staying silent felt like erasing her own pain yet again for the sake of appearances. And for the Braxton family as a whole, the question loomed heavier with every passing hour. Could this legacy survive another fracture, or was this the moment everything finally broke wide open? As the reality of the situation settled in, the family entered a phase that insiders describe as the most emotionally draining period they had faced in years. There were no explosive confrontations right away, no dramatic walkouts caught by cameras. Instead, there was distance. Sisters who once spoke daily reduced communication to short, guarded messages. Group chats went silent. Family dinners were quietly canceled. The tension didn't need to be announced. It was felt in every interaction. Tamar reportedly struggled the most during this stage. She felt caught between two impossible choices, pushing for the truth and risking permanent damage to her family, or staying quiet and absorbing yet another loss in silence. Friends close to her say she replayed every moment in her head, searching for signs she might have missed. Had there been warnings? Subtle changes in behavior? Conversations that felt off at the time but now seemed loaded in hindsight? The emotional toll was intense, made worse by the knowledge that the financial gap left behind was real and immediate. Bills didn't pause for family drama. Toni, meanwhile, took on a different role. While Tamar processed emotionally, Toni reportedly began consulting outside advisors. Not lawyers at first, but financial experts who could verify whether what they were seeing truly constituted misconduct or if there was any chance of misinterpretation. According to sources, the results were sobering. The movement of funds followed a pattern, a deliberate one. This wasn't a bookkeeping mistake or a misunderstanding of authority. Someone knew exactly what they were doing, when they were doing it, and how to keep it quiet for as long as possible. That confirmation changed everything. Once the family accepted that the situation was intentional, trust collapsed almost instantly. Meetings were held without certain members present. Information was shared selectively. Toni reportedly insisted that all further discussions be documented, even internal ones, to avoid confusion or manipulation. To some, this felt cold and overly formal. To others, it was the only way to prevent further damage. When the accused sister was finally confronted, the conversation was anything but simple. Insiders describe it as tense, emotional, and deeply uncomfortable. There were tears, raised voices, and moments of stunned silence. Explanations were offered, ranging from financial pressure to misunderstandings about permission. But for Toni and Tamar, those explanations didn't address the core issue: consent and transparency. Even if the money was intended to be returned, the act of taking it without approval crossed a line that couldn't be undone. What made the confrontation even more painful was the shared history between them. This wasn't just a business partner being accused of wrongdoing. This was someone who had shared childhood bedrooms, family secrets, and years of public scrutiny. Someone who had stood beside them during career highs and personal lows. The betrayal felt layered, not just financial but emotional, rooted in the idea that family should be the one place where trust is automatic. As word of the conflict quietly spread within inner circles, the production team faced mounting pressure. Executives needed answers. Investors wanted reassurance. The network reportedly asked whether the reboot could continue without imploding entirely. Toni was blunt. According to sources, she made it clear that she would not move forward unless strict safeguards were implemented immediately. That meant restructuring accounts, limiting access, and potentially removing a family member from involvement altogether. This is where the fracture became visible. Some sisters reportedly felt the response was too harsh, arguing that family issues should be handled privately and with grace. Others agreed with Toni, believing that ignoring the problem would only guarantee a repeat in the future. The family found itself divided not just by what had happened, but by how it should be handled. Loyalty, once unquestioned, became conditional. Tamar's position was particularly complicated. On one hand, she wanted accountability. She had been directly affected, both financially and emotionally. On the other hand, she was exhausted by the role she often played within the family, the one expected to absorb pain, forgive quickly, and keep the peace for the sake of unity. This time, something inside her reportedly snapped. Friends say she reached a breaking point where protecting her own stability mattered more than preserving a public image of togetherness. Behind closed doors, discussions turned toward consequences. Not punishment, but boundaries. What did accountability look like in a family that also functioned as a brand? Could trust be rebuilt after such a violation, or was separation the only realistic path forward? Toni reportedly argued that legacy wasn't just about staying together at all costs. It was about integrity, about refusing to normalize behavior that had already caused so much harm in the past. As decisions were weighed, emotions continued to run high. Long-standing grievances resurfaced, some unrelated to the current crisis, but fueled by it. Old arguments about money, recognition, and emotional labor were dragged into the light. What began as a financial issue had opened a door to years of unresolved pain. The family wasn't just dealing with what had happened recently, they were confronting everything they had avoided addressing for decades. The public, unaware of the specifics, began to sense something was off. Delays were noticed. Silence replaced promotion. Fans speculated, but the truth remained tightly controlled. Inside the Braxton circle, however, the writing was becoming clear. Whatever decision was made next would permanently alter how the family functioned, not just on screen, but in real life. By the time a final meeting was scheduled to determine the future of the reboot, the stakes could not have been higher. This was no longer about salvaging a show. It was about deciding what kind of family they were willing to be moving forward, and whether accountability and love could exist in the same space without tearing everything apart. By the time the final decision approached, the emotional weight hanging over the family had become impossible to ignore. Insiders describe an atmosphere thick with unresolved tension, where every conversation felt loaded and every silence said more than words ever could. The family was no longer just navigating a crisis, they were confronting the uncomfortable reality that the foundation they believed was unbreakable had already cracked. The last closed-door discussion was reportedly the most difficult. Not because of shouting or chaos, but because of exhaustion. Everyone had reached a point where pretending things could go back to normal felt dishonest. The question was no longer if something had to change, but how permanent that change needed to be. Some voices still pushed for reconciliation, arguing that family bonds should outweigh business disputes. Others quietly acknowledged that forgiveness, without accountability, had already cost them too much in the past. Toni, according to sources, was firm but visibly conflicted. She understood the emotional pain of drawing a hard line, especially knowing how the public might react. But she also knew what it meant to allow blurred boundaries to continue. Years of carrying the family brand, making sacrifices, and protecting the legacy had taught her one painful lesson: avoiding difficult decisions only delayed bigger consequences. This time, she reportedly refused to compromise on structure, transparency, and control. Tamar's role during this phase marked a noticeable shift in her personal growth. Rather than reacting emotionally as fans were used to seeing, she became quieter, more deliberate. Friends say she had reached a point where self-preservation mattered more than being understood. She stopped explaining herself repeatedly. She stopped justifying why the situation hurt her. Instead, she focused on protecting her peace, even if that meant being labeled difficult or dramatic by outsiders who didn't know the full story. The accused sister, meanwhile, reportedly oscillated between defensiveness and regret. At times, she maintained that her actions were misunderstood. At other moments, she appeared overwhelmed by the fallout, realizing too late how deeply the situation had damaged trust. But for the rest of the family, the issue had moved beyond intent. Whether harm was meant or not, harm had occurred, and ignoring it would only send the message that boundaries were optional. As discussions progressed, one truth became painfully clear: the family had never truly separated business from blood. Decisions were often made emotionally, access was granted based on trust rather than safeguards, and accountability was softened in the name of unity. What once felt like loyalty now appeared, in hindsight, dangerously unstructured. The crisis forced everyone to acknowledge that love alone was not enough to sustain a multi-million-dollar brand. Eventually, a resolution was reached, not one that brought closure, but one that established distance. Access was restricted. Roles were redefined. Some involvement was quietly removed altogether. It wasn't announced publicly, but internally, the shift was undeniable. The family dynamic changed from collaborative to cautious. Smiles became polite. Conversations became brief. What was once shared freely now required permission. The emotional aftermath was heavy. Even those who agreed with the decision mourned what had been lost. Childhood memories, shared struggles, and decades of collective success made the separation feel like a failure, even if it was necessary. Several sisters reportedly struggled with guilt, questioning whether things could have been handled differently. But others reminded them that boundaries are not punishments, they are protections, especially when patterns repeat. Outside the family, whispers grew louder. Fans noticed the absence of certain faces, the careful wording in interviews, the lack of genuine warmth that once defined their public appearances. Speculation ran wild, but no one spoke directly. The silence, intentional and strategic, became its own form of communication. Those closest to the situation understood that revealing everything would only invite more judgment, more division, and more pressure to perform healing rather than actually live it. Tamar, in particular, began redefining what family meant to her. Friends say she leaned into chosen family, people who respected her boundaries, supported her growth, and didn't require her to shrink herself to keep the peace. It was a quiet but powerful shift, signaling that she was no longer willing to sacrifice her well-being for the illusion of unity. Toni, too, appeared changed by the ordeal. While she continued to move forward professionally, there was a noticeable restraint in how she discussed family matters. Insiders suggest she had accepted that leadership sometimes requires being misunderstood. Protecting a legacy, she believed, meant making decisions that wouldn't be appreciated in the moment but would prevent deeper damage long-term. The situation left lasting scars. Holidays became complicated. Milestones felt awkward. Trust, once broken at that level, proved difficult to rebuild. And yet, there was also a sense of clarity that hadn't existed before. Expectations were finally spoken aloud. Boundaries were defined. Silence was no longer mistaken for peace. In the end, the crisis didn't just expose a financial issue, it exposed years of emotional imbalance, unspoken resentment, and blurred responsibility. The family emerged changed, not united, but more honest about who they were and what they could realistically give to one another. What fans saw as a sudden fracture was, in reality, the result of years of unresolved tension finally reaching a breaking point. And while the story may never be fully told publicly, one thing is clear: the Braxton family will never operate the same way again. Not because love disappeared, but because the cost of ignoring hard truths became too high to pay. If you've been following this story from the beginning, one thing is clear: this isn't just celebrity drama. It's a powerful reminder of what can happen when family, money, and loyalty collide without boundaries. Situations like this force hard questions. How much should you tolerate in the name of family? When does forgiveness turn into self-betrayal? And is protecting your peace sometimes more important than protecting appearances? Now we want to hear from you. Do you think the decision to create distance was necessary, or should family always come first no matter the circumstances? Was accountability handled the right way, or did things go too far? Drop your honest thoughts in the comments. This conversation doesn't end here. If you appreciate deep dives that go beyond headlines and explore the real dynamics behind celebrity stories, make sure you like this video and subscribe to the channel. Turn on notifications so you don't miss our next breakdown, because more untold stories and hidden truths are coming. Your support helps keep these conversations going, and your voice matters more than you think. Stay curious, stay engaged, and we'll see you in the next one.